Good morning, YouTube. It's time for another Paul Ross video. Paul, if you're watching this, you know I love you, man, but this has got to be done. Let's say the sheriff is donning his badge for the day. The video that I'm going to be responding to is Slavery in the Bible Explained. I'm sure you can imagine this is going to get interesting. Let's see what Paul has to say.
Many skeptics try to condemn the Bible as an evil and immoral book because of its citations on slavery. But the only problem with condemning any practice of this kind of the ancient world is that we're not speaking from the context of those times. Interpreting the past through present spectacles is not going to give us a true contextual understanding of history.
Well, I prefer to interpret the past through present skepticals. In any case, he says context matters, and I find this peculiar because we're always hearing about how Christian morality is superior and how morality is objective and how God never changes. So I don't see why context should matter. If something is not right for us to do today, it makes no sense to me why I should consider context being of any importance with regards to whether or not things were appropriate for people to do then. Now, Paul goes on to say in his video that slavery in those days isn't the same as what we consider. It was more akin to service, and that the advantages and the concept was more like our employer-employee relationship of today. I'm not sure that I'm going to dignify that with a response. I think that's kind of silly. Moreover, he also says that the advantages were so advantageous that oftentimes when slaves were offered to be set free, that they didn't want to go. And again, I think this is a little bit silly. I'm no Bible scholar, but I do understand that, I'm sure there was an element anyway of sort of walk softly and carry a big stick. So sometimes when people offer you freedom, it's sort of offered through gritted teeth. But even if that wasn't the case, we do understand today things like Stockholm Syndrome. And additionally, of course, as I understand it, if a slave was to marry, or a servant was to marry, and then, it was time for him to leave, he couldn't take his wife with him. So he would have to stick around if he wanted to still be married to his wife, and then they'd just stab him in the ear. Let's see what Paul has to say about the abolition of slavery.
Putting aside for now the fact that the abolition of slavery was almost solely and exclusively a Christian enterprise and operation. In fact, the seeds of slavery's abolition were sown right back when Jesus admonished those around him to do unto others as you would have others do unto you.
Well, first of all, if the abolition of slavery was almost solely and entirely a Christian enterprise, it might be important to understand the demographics of the time. In the United States of America, the research I've looked at around the time of the abolition movement was somewhere around 98% self-identified as Christians. So it's kind of pointless to single them out for praise. And of course, it would then follow that the people who owned slaves at that time, before the abolition movement, would have been somewhere around the same percentile. So really all that tells me is they finally smartened up. Good for them. But I don't think they smartened up because of any admonishment from Christ, for instance, to do unto others as you would have done unto you. Either way, it doesn't matter. This practice was either just or it's not just, and if it's not just, then there should be no reason for any sort of scriptural instruction on how to perform the act. Right? To me, this is silly.
We need to stop interpreting the past through our present spectacles.
Skepticals.
We need to understand that this ancient institution, which we call slavery, was an economical system in that it dealt with debt recovery and debt restitution. Very similar to what we see today in garnished wages, community service hours, and liberties taken away from individuals that have harmed others and go to prison for it.
Well, I think that's different. Are you saying that every slave in those times was a criminal? Because they're not the same thing, right? Paul.
Now, in this video post, I'm only referring to the biblical context of slavery and not to the slavery of the surrounding cultures. But what about the objection that's raised about Israel going into foreign nations and wiping out a nation and taking back slaves? Well, let's look at one of those examples. Here we have various surrounding cultures offering up their children on the fires of sacrifice, constantly, perpetually burning and murdering their own children in a genocidal religious frenzy to appease their gods and to procure things from their particular gods. Israel was commanded by God to charge into these places and to put an end to everyone and to bring intervention and liberty to these people. Now
liberty. So now slavery is equivalent to liberty. That's a nice spin, Paul. Really nice spin. For one thing, are you going to tell me that in these other cultures they were doing this to all their children, that all parents were sacrificing all children? Seems to me that a society doing that wouldn't have survived too long. I think they'd run out of people. Again, I'm not a big Bible scholar, but it seems to me that most of these tales I've heard accounted, they pretty much razed those places to the ground, right? I mean, they went in and they killed everything. The only things that were left not killed, generally, were the untouched females. Some cases they were ordered to kill all the animals too and burn all the buildings to the ground. In some cases they were able to keep some plunder, I guess, keep some of the animals for themselves. And the admonishment of taking out the untouched females was that they were to keep them for themselves. I don't recall any verse where it said, take them out for their own sake and to nurture them and to help them become, the best that they can be. Paul is about to make an equivocation to modern day sort of social work, where we go into a family and take out a child from abusive parents. Do we put them in a forced labor camp? I don't think so. I think what we do is we try to find them another home where they can be nurtured and well cared for and given a proper education so that they may be truly liberated. Let's continue.
Would have been better for the children to be brought into slavery where they have food on the table and they have safety, or to be the next victims in the fires of Molech?
So we've abandoned objective morality now, and now we're just talking about utilitarianism, essentially. We're talking about, well, what's better? What's the worst of two evils? What's the better of two evils? Suddenly the objective moral standards have gone out the window. Again, these are dictates from God, right? These were orders from God. And I'm sorry, but you're going to be hard-pressed to convince me that every single person in those cultures was evil. So it seems like it seems like an all-or-nothing venture. And it's not lost on me that all the real serious interventions by God have all been negative, right? I mean, flood the whole place, wipe out the entire village, right? I don't see any examples of positive interventions on a mass scale. I don't see where, if God could harden Pharaoh's heart, why couldn't he soften it? That would seem to be the reasonable thing to do, especially if God so loves his creation that he would want to see so many suffer in the fires of hell. Why not positive interventions? Seems to me, if you're going to intervene, I've done a little bit of research on the slaughter of the Canaanites, and it seems to me there's several different accounts of that, which is interesting. But I see accounts of sort of God, blowing out the walls and sort of handing the victory over. If you're going to intervene to that level, why not intervene in a positive way? Why do you have to intervene with bloodshed and slaughter? Nice music playing in the background, Paul, but I don't think that really changes what we're really talking about here. And quite frankly, I find it disturbing. Let's see if Paul has anything else to say.
Well, think about this.
I'm thinking.
How many government welfare agencies would not intervene today if it was discovered that a certain group or people or individual was offering up their child or children to the fires of Molech.
Well, I doubt we go in and smite them with swords and then take the children and put them into forced labor camps where they'd have safety and food on the table. I don't think that's what we would do, right?
Or to some other god or some other crazy ideal or idea.
Only the other ones are crazy.
I can guarantee you there would be intervention because it would be considered a just cause.
Yep.
Now, what I find so amazing, amusing and hypocritical about these skeptics jumping up and down in protest against the mentioning of slavery in the Bible is that these very same people, or at least a whole lot of them, will not extend this same passion and devotion to the millions of the unborn that are sacrificed on the fires of social and cultural convenience. Where is the judgment there?
Well, isn't that a clever way to sign off with a diversion? Well, okay, this is a conversation, obviously, that we're having. And I don't think the abortion issue has been laid to rest by any stretch of the imagination. Personal opinion aside, I don't think that anyone who promotes a woman's right to choose thinks that it's a good thing in the aggregate, right? That someone who has an abortion, that's just all sunshine and roses, and there's no thought given to what they've actually done. I think any woman who's had an abortion should have a sense that was an unfortunate decision to make. However, let's not be distracted by the distractions here. There's a bit of burden shifting going on. If the highest moral being is God, and then God commands the slaughter of innocents, I don't think you can have too much moral outrage when the people who are made in his image sort of resort to the same thing, right? So, he commanded essentially the abortion of unborn children in the slaughtering of their mothers and the murder of other innocent children. Now, why do I say all this? Well, for me, this isn't going to, I can hear the comments now, why do you hate God so much? For me, this forms part of the reason that I don't believe in the concept. The concept doesn't fit the reality. The morality, the claimed objective morality, doesn't fit the boots on the ground. And so, for that reason, it's, to me, meaningless. It's incongruous. A concept or an idea has to first have no internal contradictions, and then we move on to external contradictions. And this, to me, is internally contradictory. It doesn't make any sense to me. Therefore, I reject it. Now, I will say, I think Paul's a nice guy. I don't have anything against Paul. I had a nice Skype conversation with him. I think he's an honest guy, and I think he's doing his best. Unfortunately, an apologist and or any Christian that's not sort of just an armchair Christian is unfortunately forced to deal with these issues that don't speak well for the doctrine, and they've got to find a way to explain them. And unfortunately, there's a tendency, I think, to gloss over things. And I think I'd best let a more nuanced and learned Bible scholar speak on my behalf.
And everything. No, you moronic asshole. Not only does the book talk about hitting them with a rod and letting them, and you're not in trouble if it takes them more than 2 days to die. The point here, you thick dimwit, is that it advocates owning another person as property. Right. That's wrong. I don't care if you treat them like a frickin' angel, like they're the best thing that's ever happened to you. They're not property. To say that you get to own another person and pass them down to your children as property is simply freaking wrong. Done. That's exactly it.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. No, really, I couldn't have. For me, this whole subject of slavery is sort of a dead issue. For me, it calls Scripture into question, and I don't think context matters if you're going to talk about an objective moral standard. If God doesn't change, then the standards shouldn't change, and we shouldn't have to take context into account. I think what we're really dealing with here is just a historical account of the way things were at the time. And thank heavens we smartened up. Thanks everyone for watching.